Hey, Work Positive Nation, listen to the conversations among your teams for, say, a day. How collaborative are they? How transparent are people with each other? What's the level of compassion that you hear? Collaborative, transparent, and compassionate conversations indicate that positive work culture KPIs for mental health and well being are on board. My guest on this episode of the Work Positive podcast helps us get these culture KPIs on board through a model he created called ACT or ACT. So, are you ready to act? Lean in, listen up, and learn to love your work on this episode of the Work Positive podcast.
Welcome to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach, and culture architect, Dr. Joey Fawcett. Discover strategies and tactics that work positive as Dr. Joey talks with industry leaders who create a positive work culture that attracts top talent and reduces team turnover. Discover how you can create a work positive culture that increases productivity and profits. Here's your host, Dr. Joey.
Work Positive Nation, meet my new best friend and soon to be yours, Ralph Kellogg is in the house. Ralph, welcome to the Work Positive podcast, my friend.
Thank you, thank you. It's great to be with you. I've listened for a long time, followed for a long time, and I'm going to try not to fanboy out that I'm here spending time with you today.
Hey, you and my mom. both, both of you enjoy that. You remind me the first time I interviewed Dr. Bob Johansen, I'm just like a total fanboy of his because he was around when the internet was invented and is a futurist. And I just have read all his books. I absolutely love him. And I said to him, I'll try not to gush too much as your fanboy. So I don't deserve that, but thank you. I appreciate Ralph. Thanks for listening and reading what we've done. So you understand what it takes to create a work positive culture. Um, the the reason that I was totally attracted to having Ralph on an episode of the Work Positive podcast is because mental health and well-being since the pandemic have both risen as topics that HR leaders and small business owners are immensely interested in paying attention to. And the context in which we work today really requires attention to be given to mental health and well being. How did this become such and I mean, Ralph's a SHRM member. Click on his LinkedIn profile down in the show notes. You'll find out all kinds of amazing things with him. He's in Omaha, Nebraska. I love steak, so we got along immediately. Um, and he's working with Lutheran Family Services there, and so you're an HR leader with that company there.
Yes.
How did you begin to realize, Ralph, the importance of mental health and well-being in terms of creating a positive work culture?
So, yes, to your question, it really did come out of the pandemic. So I joined Lutheran Family Services right as the pandemic hit. So I interviewed online, I did the Zoom thing online, met all my coworkers online, and had a good reputation in the community for an HR leader. And shortly after I joined, I had leaders in the organization at Lutheran Family Services, and then leaders in the community saying, people are really struggling with mental health. What are you doing? What are you recommending? And honestly, and I say this in my TED talk because I believed it was true, I really believe people were getting through the pandemic the same way that I was, which was binge shopping on Amazon, watching Tiger King, and eating like I was in my own after school special. That's what I believe people were doing.
The last name like Kellogg, we assume cereal was your snack of choice.
Cereal, Frosted Flakes, whatever your choice.
Hey, you
Yes,
talk about my people, Tony the Tiger. I grew up with them.
absolutely. I can't do the voice though. Um, uh, and so I've always been someone who has struggled with mental health in my professional life, personal life, obviously.
Hmm.
And I was really ashamed of it for a long time because when I came up in my career, admitting that you had issues with mental health, almost akin to saying you can't do your job, or you're some way fragile, that you can't function and operate in the way that quote unquote normal people do.
Mm,
So as the pandemic wore on, what I found is that my mental health issues really started to kick in personally. And so I began suffering from anxiety and panic, and those things really came to the forefront. And one day I just sat down and I thought, well, if I was going to coach somebody who came to me with these issues, what would I tell them? And that sort of introspection really helped me create the ACT model that I talk about in the TED Talk, which was the acknowledgement, the compassion and accountability, and the transparency. And really what I began to focus on with people is just to acknowledge that everybody in every organization is struggling with something that's impacting their mental health. Let's
mm,
just be realistic about that. And then what can we do to create safe spaces so that people feel open and honest and, protected, if you will, if they do divulge that they have a mental health issue? How can we collaborate rather than how do we ostracize? And
yeah.
that really helped lift the conversation to another level.
Mm. You remind me of a statistic that closer to the pandemic or towards the end I quoted often, and that is that prescription medications for antidepressants, anti-anxieties were up 30% during
Hmm.
the pandemic. Um, I knew we were in trouble during the pandemic when liquor stores were declared essential, and because that's just how we medicate ourselves, right? Uh,
Right,
some of us do. I shouldn't say all of us do. But I've forgotten the statistic. I can make up something. I won't. I won't dishonor my listeners. But anyway, go to Google and find the statistic indicates how much alcohol sales, liquor sales particularly, went up during the pandemic. It was ginormous. So we were struggling to find ways to get through the isolation, the loneliness. These are some of the identifiers I saw, and then the increase in anxiety, which is so
yes.
paralyzing. And I grew up in that in a similar time. Maybe I started work a little bit earlier than you, in which not only was it a sign of weakness, but it was like putting a target on your back to admit, "Hey, I'm a little depressed today." Or, of course, we tend to
Hmm.
downplay the extent of these things, or just asking to be fired if you
Hmm.
if
Absolutely.
oh my God, to talk about a mental health day. What is that? Why in the world would you need one of those? Suck it up, Skippy, and go back in there and go to work. So one of the amazing things that I find going on in the workplace today with four generations in most places, Gen Z, they're not putting up with that crap, if you will,
Right,
that my generation, the boomers did.
right.
They put their therapist appointment on there. They expect to have a therapist. They expect to have a coach as a part of their work environment now. So the cool thing is we've begun to talk about mental health and well-being, begun to look at the complete person as a human being and a human doing. So being hired during the pandemic gave you a unique vantage point on how to discover what was going on within Lutheran Family Services and how to best help.
Hmm.
And my hunch is that's where
Hmm.
your ACT model came from, that laboratory.
Right, right. Yeah, so I work in Lutheran Family Services. We have a model that is focused on obviously behavioral health, mental well-being, but we also do refugee services. We also do foster care and adoption. So we're about taking care of people. And
Mm,
what I realized is that the people taking care of people needed to be taken care of too. And so what does that look like
100%.
for them? And um, how do you as an HR person, as a people leader, walk that line of let me care for you, let me provide the compassion, the collaboration for you, and also honor you, respect your privacy,
Mm,
provide you with a safe place to land if you need that, and remove judgment from the environment. So what we did at LFS is we actually put in mental health days. People can take 4 mental health days per year, and that's just part of being an employee. So we tried to remove the stigma and say, if you need a mental health day, take a mental health day. They're here for you to use. It's a no-cost way to invest in the well-being of employees, and it is a way to extend the olive branch, so to speak, to say, hey, there's no shame in saying that I need a day for myself because I've got things that are going on. The other thing that we did too, in terms of creating a culture in the organization, is we implemented paid parental leave for our parents who are expecting a child. We implemented pet bereavement because we know that pets are family, and so we implemented that as a way to provide holistic mental health care for people when they are grieving and when they're going through trauma, and really recognizing that my trauma may not be significant to you. You might look at me and say, well, that's an easy fix, you should do abcd, but it's significant to me. And so how do I meet that need and that issue with the employee where they are, instead of trying to have the employee fit a mold. So it really was a call to action on our part to say, what can we do better, given that we are in a field of mental health.
Right. My friend Josh Friedman would be delighted to hear you talking about emotional intelligence in that way, because your experience is going to be different from mine. So empathy is so vitally important. And thank you for recognizing compassion fatigue, because those persons who help others, and I mean, that's their job, to help others, they need help too. So thank you. And thank you to
Mhm.
Lutheran Family Services for the amazing work you do in the Omaha community, and to all the other family services and mental health providers who help us stay on track. So when you're talking to prospective team members, and you've
Mhm.
created this awesome positive work culture that sees people as people, and you understand that people are literally the product here that we're working with. How do you communicate that to top talent when you have an opening and you're looking for that right fit?
So, in as much as we would advertise benefits or compensation or things along those lines, we really sit down with the prospective employee and ensure that the employment brand that we're offering really aligns with what they're looking for in a position. So, it's really digging into the motivations of what's meaningful for you, what's going to give you purpose when you work here, what do you need from an employer, and then really understanding, can we measure what you need, between what we can provide, and then having an open and honest conversation with the employee or the applicant. I think a lot of times where the conversations between the interview and when someone starts, where things fall short, is that the interview is done in such a perfunctory way where uh, where it's, yep, you check the boxes, you look great on paper, we're going to hire you. And I know there's more to it than that, but there's not a conversation about, tell me what a day in the life is here. What can I expect from the employer if this happens to me? And then conversely, on the employer side, here's what we expect from you. We expect for you to be open and honest. We expect for you to bring your authentic self. We expect for you to offer ideas. We expect for you to, be someone, if something needs to be changed, that you respectfully help challenge the process and help us work internally to make things better. So it's all of those communication signals and all of those verbal cues that we provide to the candidate when before they're coming into the organization, and then it's a continual reiteration of it during onboarding, during the orientation sessions, and then doing consistent feedback processes with the employee throughout that first year, so that they really come to understand we're in this together. This is a partnership, and we succeed when you succeed. And I think that that's just so important, that the message that you're providing externally, that you show that you walk the talk when the employee comes through the door.
Yeah, and I'm sure in those initial conversations saying you have 4 mental health days to take each year,
Mhm,
that communicates
mhm,
a lot about your culture there. Now, you just put your finger
mhm.
on the pulse of one of the culture KPIs, at least that we understand in Work Positive Nation, for retaining top talent, for keeping them on our teams, and that is those consistent feedback sessions. How many of those do you do in
Mhm.
the first year? And if I can double up on questions here, how long do they extend after that first year?
We that's a something I'm really proud of. We have recently moved to we've eliminated the term performance management. I hate that term
Okay.
for performance development,
Mm,
which really focuses on having consistent coaching sessions with employees at a minimum once a month, but more if they're needed. And then
mm,
quarterly, we will sit down with the employee and we will go through a formal review with them to say, if your review was due today, this is what where your score would be. This is where you would sit as an employee. And we discuss goals. We discuss where they are to goal. We discuss what's an obstacle in the organization, what can the manager provide to the employee to help remove those obstacles. And then we consistently do that throughout the year. So 4 times a year, they're getting a look inside of their formal performance, where they would be at the end of the performance review period. But the development piece comes in where we help the employee course correct. So if they're not meeting a goal in the first quarter, what can we do to make this better? What can we do to, help keep the wheels on the bus, so to speak, or help get you back on track with your goal? What does that look like? And instead of being prescriptive and telling the employee what we want, it's a collaborative conversation where the employee can say, this is what's really stumping me. I'm working with with a peer and we're having communication issues and I don't know how to overcome them. Or this piece of technology is really overwhelming for me. It's not something that's natural to my skill set and I need help. And I think when you open the door to, again, letting people know we're successful when you're successful, and we're inviting that information, consistently, or giving you an invitation to provide that information consistently, it takes the fear out of the manager employee relationship that's been, endemic since the course of time, or since the beginning of time,
mm,
and really sets things on a pathway to say, we're here to collaborate, we're here to work together, we're here to accomplish, whatever the work happens to be. You bring talents, I bring talents as your manager and leader. Let's work together to figure out what this looks like so that you can be successful. And it's centered in a team message, and it's centered in a message of collaboration and success.
mm. Collaborate is one of my favorite top 12 words, by the way. So I think you used it 3 or 4 times in a particular segment. So thanks for that. And
Sorry about that.
oh no, I love it. Let's collaborate about collaboration. Um, I love it because you also gave us some markers for how that happens. You said a couple of times there, if you win, we win. So ultimately, who who wins are the persons that Lutheran Family Services are
Mhm.
serving, right? Your clients. So
Absolutely.
what kind of dramatic effect have you seen, as you've emphasized, performance development on the improvement in client services?
So that is a great question. So one of the things that we do measure, obviously, given the work that we do, is the connection between the work that the employee does and the impact that we have on clients. And so we look on a consistent basis at satisfaction scores from clients, from the intake process, if they're coming in for mental health services, all the way through, if we're looking at refugees who are coming in from Afghanistan or the Ukraine, what their settlement process is like in the United States. So we're consistently having conversations, measuring key metrics that we have based on what grantors are looking for or funders are looking for to ensure that we're meeting those specific metrics. But one thing that we consistently do with our employees and with our clients is to say, is the services that we're providing you meeting your expectations? And if not, tell us what we can do better. And sometimes asking for direct feedback like that, um, it can be hard because when you think that you're doing everything that you can and someone may say you're missing the mark, or this isn't working for me, or this isn't something that I feel like will benefit me long term, if your ego is tied to the process or to what's been created, that can be a hard message to digest. But what we have done is use the metrics, we've used the feedback, we even use the feedback from employees when we say from employees pulse surveys and engagement surveys about how we're serving clients and what are you hearing from them. We will openly admit and we will say, we didn't know this was an issue. We didn't know this was a problem. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. This is what we're going to do to fix it, and we're going to continue to follow up on this, over the course of the next 6 months, 9 months, a year, to ensure that we're getting better. So the metrics that we use, obviously, those are we're meeting and we're exceeding those metrics based on the volume of business that we do from our behavioral health side, our refugee services, and our adoption. But more what we do, because we are a human-centered business, is engage in those conversations to ensure that what we think is happening is truly the reality. And if it's not, how do we course correct? And being okay with that, knowing that we're a learning organization and that we get better when we get the feedback to do better. And being okay with not everything's going to be puppy dogs and rainbows. You're going to get feedback that you don't like. That's okay. That's part of the growth process. And that we've set an environment up that people feel comfortable and willing to provide that feedback to us is fantastic.
That is fantastic. So you proactively search out
Mhm.
according to your metrics or your culture KPIs. Here are the standards we want to do. And I love the transparency and authenticity. Missed that one, didn't know it was an issue, but here's what we're going to do. And so we want to collaborate with you to help create the best path forward to address that issue. Ralph Kellogg is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Get in the show notes below, and you can find some really useful information. And Ralph will tell us a little bit more about it later. Connectionpoints.com is
Yes.
his website. In addition to the work he does with Lutheran Family Services as a SHRM member there and leading HR, he has connectionpoints.com, so you'll find some great resources there. Also, you'll find the URL for his TED Talk that he referenced a moment ago and his LinkedIn profile so you can meet him the way that I met him, right? So,
Yes.
what are some of the challenges that you face at Lutheran Family Services, Ralph, with living into this uber passionate desire to make sure that mental health and well being is taken care of?
That's a great question. I would say the one thing that we still face as a society is stigma regarding mental health and mental well-being. I remember when I first decided to disclose that I struggled with mental health, and that obviously led into the TED Talk and some other things.
Right.
But and I don't mean this to be in any way a derogatory statement, but there were some people that I told that I thought it would have been easier to tell them that I had terminal cancer than I struggled with panic or anxiety, based on the way that they reacted and based on the way that I was treated afterwards.
Mm,
And so I think what we collectively as a human community can do is to allow people to walk into their truth and to say there's no reason to feel that you need to be ashamed or upset or in any way maligned because you're coming forward with a disclosure that you struggle with mental health. The thing is, all of us do. Some of us call it burnout. Some of us call it stressed out. Some of us call it, I'm having a bad day. I've got the blues. Everybody has experienced on some level, shape, or form an issue with mental health. Some of us just feel it a little bit more than others. And I don't mean to, minimize anyone's struggles or anyone's
Oh no.
experiences.
Mm-mm.
But for me, being anxious is more than having butterflies in my stomach. It's a visceral feeling that I get. It's visible. My face flushes. I'll start perspiring. It's gross. I don't really like it, but it's my reality.
It's a
Um,
physical,
and
it's a physical
instead of shying
reaction.
away from that, I've now walked into it. So I've been out where that's occurred, and people will say, "Are you okay?" And I'll just say, "I just need a minute. I'm just having a little bit of an anxiety issue. I just need a minute." And
Yeah.
being able to say that and being safe to say that, and knowing that I'm being authentic in saying that, is truly a blessing, and it's not one that I take for granted, because there are so many people, even with the heightened lens that's been placed on mental health, that don't feel comfortable in saying that, especially, I would say, men, especially people from certain communities or certain demographics. Again, when I grew up, saying you had a mental health issue was sort of a shameful thing. And I carried that with me into my adult life. And it's only been within the last probably 5 to 7 years that I've said, this is who I am, and this is something that's a part of me. And, like I write right-handed and I wear glasses. This is just part of who I am.
Mm.
And so I think if we can just normalize those conversations, and open the door to say he's just having a moment. It'll be okay, or he just needs some support right now, and asking what that person needs instead of judging or prescribing what they need. I
Mm.
think that would help really, really advance the conversation.
Yeah, and just recognizing that so often it's brain chemistry, right?
Mhm.
It's a physiological reaction to circumstances around us, or sometimes it just happens, right? If you're
Mhm.
diabetic, you don't say, "Boy, your pancreas sucks," or anything like that.
Right,
We just
right.
recognize, hey, I take insulin, I control my diet. No, I'm not going to eat dessert or have that fruity drink. It's just kind of the way it is. So just understanding my dopamine doesn't produce at your level, my serotonin is lower, or my body just doesn't produce oxytocin to
Right, right.
balance my moods, and therefore I'm going to have moments where yes, I can supplement those hormones in my body and increase their production, but there are going to be those times when it doesn't quite work, just like a diabetic, right? It doesn't always work for me.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for addressing that challenge right up. Where's the next frontier for us? The challenge that you see us as needing to confront today in order to be able to advance understanding and acceptance of mental health and well-being in the work.
I think the next challenge for us is to really get get clear on the impact and the importance of mental health. People cannot leave their problems at the door. They're going to bring in outside. I like to tell people outside impacts inside. So your outside environment's going to impact your inside in the workplace.
Mhm.
I think that we need to be able to train leaders and to train managers to walk into conversations that we have typically said are taboo, about asking people, "Are you doing okay? Is there something that we can do for you?" Um, you know, I know that you have had a loss in your family or whatever. What can we do to support you during this time?
Mm.
I've often found it interesting, that managers and leaders are comfortable asking, once they hear someone's gone through a cancer scare, how are you feeling? What's your, what, how are the treatments going? Things along those lines.
Mm.
But when someone discloses to their manager, I'm suffering from anxiety, or I've got depression, or I've got panic going on, it's disclosed to the manager, and the manager will never talk to the employee about it again. And so that creates this level of I've disclosed something to you, you've not brought it up to me. Is it safe to talk to you about this again? And so I think being able to train leaders and managers to have compassionate conversations, transparent conversations, to provide that safe place to land is critical. I think that the mental health first aid training that's gone on all across the country for individuals to understand the impact of mental health, not only in workplaces but through the community, is critical. I think that should be mandatory for anybody who leads people. And when I look at the statistic, the CDC released not too long ago that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, yet it's them talked about. And I think, well, the 10th leading cause of death, if it were a physical disease, would it have more visibility, and would people be talking about it more than they would by someone who may have died by suicide? And so I think when we look at our mental health, our mental well-being, I think we need to get very, very clear that your mental health and your mental well-being have a direct impact on your physical health and physical well-being, and everything is inextricably tied. And so to ignore one means to ignore the other, and we've got to get better about having conversations with people that are human-centered rather than focused on being so production-centered, or what have you done for me lately kind of thing. I understand work needs to be done, I get it, but you can't get the work done without people being fully engaged. And so let's address what we need to get them fully engaged and being authentic, and then let's connect them to the work. Because if you get one resolved, you can get the other resolved as well.
Yeah, and we leaders, to your point, we leaders and managers so often are uncomfortable with those conversations, it seems to me, is because
Right,
we receive people coming to us hourly, it seems like, who have problems to be solved. So if you're a leader or a manager and you just heard Ralph talking about that, um, this is not your problem to solve. If
right,
a team member says, "Hey, I'm not having a good day," or "I'm unusually anxious today," or I'm feeling depressed," it's not yours to solve. How can I support you? Is a great psychologically safe question that allows you to bring resources to bear, persons who are experts in that field. That's a
right.
keen insight there, Ralph. Thanks so much for that. Ralph Kellogg is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive podcast. As I mentioned a moment ago, Ralph, you have a website, connectionpoints.com. When we go there, by the way, the URL is in the show notes. So if you're walking the dog around the Peloton or something, you can do it. And as soon as you get off, and just click right there on it. What are we going to find when we go to connectionpoints.com?
So I am obviously engaged in the field of human resources. I do human resources consulting primarily for small to medium-sized firms in the nonprofit arena, but also for profit organizations. So that is one of my specialties. So I will help organizations with compliance and with organizational development and training and things along those lines. I also am a certified DISC coach, so I use the DISC psychometric to help coach leaders, help coach up and coming leaders, and to really help with team cohesiveness, learning work styles, and learning practical ways to engage with each other so that the team can be as productive and as successful as possible, but also for people to recognize their own strengths and gifts that they bring to the workplace. And then lastly, I do a lot of public speaking around mental health. I go to community groups, I do podcasts, and go to a variety of businesses and speak on the topic of mental health and mental well-being in the workplace. I share my own story. I talk about the struggles that I've had. I try to humanize the conversation as much as possible, so that giving people, permission to say it's okay not to feel okay, and we as a community, hopefully can come together and support you, whatever support looks like for you during those times.
Wonderful. Connectionpoints.com, URLs in the show notes. Also, there's a URL to your TED Talk there, Ralph. So thanks for that. And you can reach out to Ralph directly through his LinkedIn profile, which you'll find there at the bottom. So Work Positive Nation always wants to know from my guests. So Ralph Kellogg, I gotta ask you, man, what's your one thing? What's one thing Work Positive Nation can do starting today to create a positive work culture?
Build relationships, invest in people, and really focus on having intentional conversations, and really ensure that the connections that you make are authentic and meaningful, and you're meeting someone where they are so that you can build a collaborative and productive relationship.
Thank you so much, Ralph. You've reminded us of why we do what we do when we go to work
Yes,
each and every day.
yes,
Thank you so much, my
yes.
friend. Ralph Kellogg, thanks. May you receive 100-fold everything that you've given us today. And again, Work Positive Nation, you've got some URLs there in the show notes so you can reach out to Ralph yourself. Ralph, I'm better for this conversation. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed it. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends who are HR and small business leaders so they can do one thing today to create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits. I'd like to give you a free Work Positive course just for listening. It's called Something to Talk About, and it's transformed the work conversations of so many people all over the world. Get your free copy when you go to workpositive.today/something to talk about, and you can start transforming your conversations today. Remember, it pays to work positive.